Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over the January 2025 Living Environment Regents Exam. In this video we're going to be focusing on part C, which are 17 short response questions starting with number 56. A link to this test can be found in the description of this video if you want to follow along at home. And this video is going to be part of a bigger series where I'm going to go over every single question from every single part of this exam. So the video is going over part B1, B2, A, and D are already uploaded. They're in the description if you want to watch them or check them out after you finish watching this video. That being said, we're going to start off with number 56, which actually starts up here with this blurb. It says that in 2000, scientists at Duke University designed an experiment using mice that carry a gene for yellow fur color. Mice with the yellow fur gene have a large appetite and a tendency to develop cancer and diabetes. The photo shows a mouse with a yellow fur gene on the left and a normal mouse with the brown fur gene on the right. So obviously we can see that it does love eating because it's a lot bigger. The scientists wanted to see if they could reduce the chances of the offspring of the yellow mice developing the diseases by changing the expression of the gene for yellow fur color. They began by changing the diet of yellow female mice to a diet containing food rich in methyl groups. Methyl groups are small clusters of chemicals that attach to the gene and turn it off. Their offspring that have the methylated DNA, so that's the DNA that has the methyl groups attached to it, were found to be thin, have brown fur, and have a less chance of developing cancer and diabetes. So essentially what that tells me is you've methylated the DNA and you've turned off the gene that actually gives them cancer and makes them large. Right? Before we methylated them, they had this yellow fur. They were a lot larger because they had the higher appetite. They had a higher chance of developing diabetes and cancer because of their diet. Once you methylate this DNA, you attach that methyl group that turns off that gene. What happened was that they gained a brown color, they shrunk in size, their chance of developing cancer decreased. And we can see here how these methyl groups essentially shut off this DNA, right? The fact there's a methyl group here, essentially, it's not shown here really that well, but it would essentially make this DNA wrap around itself super tightly here so that it wouldn't be able to be read, all right? So the researchers concluded that the offspring were born with an epigenetic alteration to their DNA. Epigenetic alterations are inheritable changes in gene expression patterns independent of the primary DNA sequence. The expression of the gene is altered, but the DNA sequence usually remains unchanged. In addition to diet, other factors such as hormones, physical activity, stress, tobacco, and alcohol and alcohol use can also cause epigenetic changes. So epigenetic changes is just a difference in the way that your genes are expressed without actually changing the letters that are found between them, right? So your amount of stress can actually change whether or not this part of your DNA is read more frequently than other parts of your DNA, right? That's epigenetics. That's a change in how this is read by your body. And that change is caused not by actually changing this G to a C or this A to a T so that it reads a different section. That's actually because a certain lifestyle that you had would methylate it or make it more or less readable. So sometimes identical twins have different physical traits. Using the experiment Duke scientists performed on mice with yellow color gene as a model, explain how epigenetics could be the cause of differences observed in identical twins. So, well, we just talked about how diet, hormones, physical activity, stress, tobacco, and alcohol can cause epigenetic changes, which is what we found in the mice. So one of the twins could have a diet high in foods with methyl groups while the other twin does not. So because one twin is eating a diet that's high in methyl groups, which is what we made this fat mouse eat, that could turn off some genes in one of the twins that are present in the other twin. Another way that you could have answered this was by saying that one twin may be under stress or may use drugs or may use cigarettes while the other twin does not. So essentially, if you say that one twin has a different diet, or one twin has expresses their hormones different, or has different physical activity, or has different stress, or has different tobacco, or has different alcohol usage, that's one reason why they could be genetically different from one another, because any one of these reasons is a reason for their DNA to be expressed differently. So as long as you say that they have a different diet, a different level of hormone balance, a different physical activity level, a different stress level, tobacco use, and alcohol level, that would have given you full credit here. Yeah. 57 asks, explain why epigenetic changes are not usually considered mutations. And this is because the original DNA sequence is not altered, right? It's not a mutation because you're not changing this T into an A or this G into a C. What's happening is that your environment is binding to this piece of DNA and as a result making it more or less readable. It's not a mutation because you're not actually changing anything to DNA. You're just making the DNA fold in a specific way, or you're making the DNA more likely to be read or less likely to be read. You're not actually changing the original DNA sequence. You could also say that the sequence of nitrogenous bases, which are the letters are remaining the same. The only difference is the presence of the methyl groups that are turning the gene on or off. And also, a gene can be methylated and unmethylated, right? You can take off these methyl groups. You can't reverse a mutation, right? Once one of these letters is changed, it's changed. So you could have said that a mutation cannot be reversed. Epigenetic factors can be reversed. You could have said that the original DNA sequence is not altered. All right. Number 58 relies on this blurb right here. It said that getting stung by a scorpion is painful. The pain serves as a warning to its predators to stay away. Scorpion venom contains toxins that are recognized by the pain receptors on nerve cells. These receptors are the same as those that cause a burning feeling when you touch something hot. But being stung by a scorpion is much more painful than touching a hot object. The venom itself does not cause pain at all. It also contains an acid that changes the pH of a surrounding area of the affected nerve cell. The change in pH increases the intensity of the pain message. In populations of scorpions, a mutation occurred that resulted in the venom having no effect on its predators. Explain why the number of predators that feed exclusively on the scorpions would decrease over time. Justify your answer. So what's happening here is that when you get stung by the scorpion, essentially, it increases the pH of the area around the nerve cell, which then makes you feel an immense amount of pain, right? Because of that change in the pH level. So now they're asking you, why would the number of predators that feed on the scorpion decrease over time if the venom has no effect on the predators? And you could say that the predators would decrease because they have more competition, since more animals would be able to eat the scorpions, right? If the venom has no effect on the predators, it no longer increases the pH. So the predators are no longer hurt, right? You no longer feel a burning or stinging sensation after he hits you with his stinger. That means that there's more motivation for more predators to go in here and eat it because he's less of a threat, right? He won't sting you. It won't hurt. Why? Because the stinger is malfunctioned, right? So you could have said that. You could also said that the number of predators would decrease because they would consume many of the scorpions and would not have enough food. Again, they overeat, right? And they have to compete within this new source of food, right? So they can overcompete between one another. And you could have also said that the predators would die of starvation. The number of scorpions would decrease because most of them would have been eaten by the predators because they would not be able to defend themselves. So because of this change, the scorpions would not be able to defend themselves, and as a result, they would be overhunted and their population would decrease too much. The predators would then die of starvation because they would be over-reliant on the population of the scorpions for food, right? So all three of those answers would have given you full credit in this case, right? So 59 through 61 are based on this blurb right here. It says that scientists have studied the medicinal herb Fritillaria de la Valle, which is called Fritillaria, which is very difficult to cultivate. This herb is used in Chinese traditional medicine to treat lung conditions such as bronchitis and bad coughs. This threatened herb grows among wild rocks in dry, cold, mountainous places in China. Most Fritillaria have bright green leaves and sunny yellow flowers. The scientists have noticed something unusual. In places where people often gather and harvest the herb, more and more plants of the same species have dull brown flower color. Many people have trouble finding this dull brown variety that blends in with the rocky area where it grows. So this plant is overgrazed, right? People really like it because it helps them get over their cough conditions, and they often identify it by its extremely bright colored flower, right? I can change this to yellow. So it has a very bright yellow color, and that's how people usually identify it. But more and more often, this flower has now turned into a duller and duller brown color. And essentially the reason behind that is to camouflage itself from predators, which are humans that are trying to harvest it, right? So that's why this trait is prevalent, right? But the original source of this brown variation is a mutation, right? A part of the DNA got mutated, specifically the part of the DNA that codes for flower color, right? So that gene, that section of the DNA that codes for flower color at some point got mutated, right? One of the bases got replaced, or many of the bases got deleted or replaced, and as a result, the protein that was produced, instead of making a yellow pigmentation, it makes a brown pigmentation. The source of any sort of genetic variation is always due to mutations, right? Now, the mutation caused the variation, but the reason that the variation stayed was because it gave them an advantage, right? So as long as you say that there's a mutation occurring, you get full points here. 60 says that Fritillaria grows very slowly, taking 5 years to reproduce. Predict which flower color will be more common in areas accessible by humans after 20 years. Well, think about it this way, right? If you have a yellow flower color, humans are able to detect you more readily, and they'll pick you off. Once they pick you, you're dead, right? You're out of the ground, you can't reproduce anymore. So in areas that are more accessible to humans, you'll see that there are more Fritillaria with brown colored flowers, right? Right? Because the brown color will increase their likelihood to survive because they will hide from the humans, right? 61 says human efforts to cultivate the endangered species have not been successful. What argument could be made to justify continued efforts to preserve this species by cultivation? So in this case, people are continually unable to cultivate it because it's just growing in such a difficult location, and it's also so difficult to find. So how can we justify continuing to spend energy? How can we say, hey, it's okay, even though it's so hard to find this plant, so hard to harvest it, we can still go ahead and harvest it. And one justification is that the herb is a medicine that could be useful, right? So we should try and grow it instead of direct harvesting it from the environment, right? So instead of having to go on these mountains, what's an alternative? Well, because it's a really good effective cough medicine, we should continue to harvest it, but maybe we should bring it into a different environment so we don't have to disturb the area that it's around. Another reason could be to try and grow. One reason to try and grow the herb is to maintain biodiversity so it doesn't become extinct. So again, what argument could be made to justify continued efforts to preserve its species by cultivation? Remember, cultivation is growing it in its non-natural environment, right? If you cultivate something, you're pretty much farming it. So the argument to farming it is, number one, it's beneficial and we waste less time by having to go to these far lands to get it. And number two, we can preserve the native species by growing it on farms, right? Instead of overgrazing it and killing it off in its natural environment. And the third reason could be that the plant has value for humans, so we should try to preserve it by farming it. We should not just go into its natural environment and pick all of these flowers out. Instead, we should take the seeds, plant it where it's more accessible, and leave it alone in the nature. Why? Because it's valuable to us, because it helps us treat cough. So here it's saying 3 different food chains present in a food web are represented below. So prickly pear cactus gets eaten by antelope squirrels, which got eaten by western diamondback rattlesnakes, which get eaten by red-tailed hawks. Saguaro cactus gets eaten by wooden bats, which get eaten by western diamondback rattlesnakes. And finally, brittlebush gets eaten by grasshopper mice. Identify the food chain A, B, or C in which there would be the least amount of energy available to the last consumer in the feeding sequence. So essentially, that would have to be the one with the most amount of animals inside of it. And that would have to be A. Okay? So correct answer 62 has to be food chain A, because each level, more and more energy is thrown off as heat. So you should write that food chain A has to be the one with the least amount of energy level available to the last consumer, because energy is transferred to the environment at each level. So because this one has the most amount of levels, this one has the greatest transfer of energy to the surroundings out of anyone else. This one only has 1 transfer of energy to the surrounding. This one only has 2 transfers of energy to the surroundings. This one has 3. So as a result, this one loses the most amount of heat the most amount of energy to heat as we reach the red-tailed hawk, right? So that's something you just need to memorize here. Every single movement to a new level on the food chain is a movement that involves the loss of heat to the environment, right? So number 63 and 64 says a woman gives birth after a uterus transplant. Women with uterine factor infertility, UFI, either don't have a uterus or have a uterus that doesn't function. A uterus transplant has emerged as a potential solution for these women. In 2019, the first baby born in North America was delivered by a mother who received a uterus transplant. Describe the role of the uterus in the process of human reproduction. Well, the uterus is the chamber that supports the growth of the fetus, and the It's where the zygote implants itself into the wall, and the zygote becomes an embryo, which then becomes a fetus. So you have to say that the uterus supports the internal development of the embryo or fetus. That would get you a point. You could say that the uterus is the origin to which the placenta attaches. Again, that would give you a point. Or you could say that the embryo/fetus develops in the uterus. These would all get you full points on this question. Then it says that during pregnancy, the women are given medication to prevent the transplanted uterus from being rejected after the baby is born. The transplanted uterus is removed. Explain why a woman's body would reject the transplanted uterus if she did not take the medication. So this is a common issue with a lot of organ transplants, right? A lot of bodies are actually going to reject the transplanted organ because it has foreign antigens on it, right? So the immune system might attack the transplanted organ because it's interpreted as a foreign body or as an invading body. It has markers on the outside of its cells that are different from the markers on the inside of your cells. So maybe the new uterus could have triangle markers, but your cells have, circle markers. So whenever that triangle enters your body, your cells aren't able to recognize it, right? Oh, we don't have any triangles. This must be foreign. Let's destroy it. So you could have also said that the immune system would attack the uterus because the antigens, which are the markers on the transplanted organs, would activate an immune response. Right? Remember, this is all an immune response. And the third choice you could have said was that the woman would make antibodies or white blood cells that would attack the organ if she does not take certain drugs to prevent this, right? So oftentimes these drugs are immunosuppressants. They suppress or stop the immune system from responding to this non-existent threat from the new organ, right? So here, 65 is based on this graph. It says that human actions have affected the biodiversity of multiple ecosystems on Earth. Make a claim as to how human actions have affected biodiversity. Support your claim with evidence from the graph. So in this case, we see species extinctions, and here we have time. So over time, we see that as the human population, which is the solid line, increases, the species extinction, the rate at which the species go extinct also increases, right? So as our population goes higher and higher, more and more species can go extinct. So as species go extinct, there's less unique species in the world. Biodiversity describes the total number of unique species. So if the number of unique species is dying because they're going extinct, the biodiversity is decreasing. So to get full credit on this point, you could have said that biodiversity has declined because the number of species extinction has increased as the human population has increased and destroyed habitats. You could also said that as the increasing human population used resources required by other species, biodiversity decreased. So as our population increased, we needed new places to live. We moved into new environments. As we move into new environments, we take away that space from other animals that need it, and as a result, they go extinct. You could have also said that an increase in human population has led to more deforestation, resulting in an increase in extinction as shown on the graph, right? Again, as we expand, we need more resources. As we use more resources, we pollute the world, or we take away land from animals that need it, destroying natural habitats, leading to extinction, and thus less species being present, decreasing biodiversity, right? So anything like that you could have written, okay? So 66 asks us to base our question off the diagram and our knowledge of biology. So this represents a feedback mechanism in humans. So if you have high blood sugar, the pancreas secretes more of a hormone. I already know this hormone is going to be insulin because we're dealing with blood sugar in the pancreas. So after insulin is released, the cells begin to uptake more sugar and digest the sugar. So that lowers the blood sugar. And when there's too low of a blood sugar, the pancreas is going to release a hormone called glucagon. And that glucagon is going to stimulate the glycogen inner cells to be broken down to produce more glucose, which would increase the sugar in your blood. Because glucose is a blood, glycogen is a bunch of glucose combined together. So number 66 asks, an individual with a healthy pancreas eats a starchy snack. Explain why the pancreas would secrete more hormone a short time later. Support your answer with information on the diagram. So a starchy snack, a starch is a type of sugar. So eating a starchy snack increases your blood sugar. In response to the higher blood sugar, the pancreas has to secrete a hormone to decrease or lower the blood sugar. So if you said that, that would give you a full point, right? You could also said that the starchy snack will be broken down into sugar that would be absorbed into the blood, causing a high blood sugar. This would cause the pancreas to secrete more hormones to lower the blood sugar. You could also say that the starch will be broken down into sugar and insulin will be released due to the high blood sugar level, right? So again, pretty easy question, right? All you need to know here is that the starch is a sugar. High sugar means more insulin or more of this mystery hormone, which would then lower the blood sugar to maintain your blood sugar level at a constant rate. Whenever you eat something, your blood sugar usually spikes because what you eat usually has sugar inside of it, and the pancreas needs to secrete this hormone to kind of dull out that spike so that you are at a constant base level. So number 67 is based on this diagram. It says, explain how the lack of nutrients can impact the cellular process needed to move molecule A into the cell, right? So if we think about it like this way, this is representing two molecules A and B, resulting from the digestion of food moving into a cell. So let's analyze the situation. Right now, we have 4 molecules of B on the outside and 1 molecule of B on the inside. Remember that molecules want to go from a concentration of high all the way to low. So right now, the concentration of B on the outside of the cell is high. The concentration of B on the inside of the cell is low. So naturally, they want to diffuse across this membrane to enter the inside of the cell, right? That's diffusion. It does not require any energy. Anything that's going from a high concentration to low concentration generally does not require energy. That is passive transport, or called diffusion, right? It just diffuses from high to low, right? For example, if you spray perfume in a big room, the entire room won't smell like perfume, right? The area that you sprayed perfume will initially smell like the scent, and then it'll slowly dissipate throughout the entire room, right? Very slowly. Same thing here, right? If you have a high concentration on the outside of the cell, you want to go inside of the cell where there's low concentration. Now, the opposite is true with A. This A, right? There's a high concentration of A on the inside, and there's a low concentration of A on the outside, right? So you have a high, let me just try and erase this. So you have a high, I guess I can't release that. So the amount of A on the inside is high, and you're going on the amount of A on the outside is low. So if you want to go from low to high, this is going to be active transport. This is essentially going against the way that your body or your cells or molecules want to go. Molecules always want to go from high concentration to low concentration. If you want to go from low to high, the opposite way around, you need energy, right? And that is called active transport. So if you have a lack of nutrients, you cannot produce the ATP that is required to power this energy-intensive process, right? So you could have said that energy is needed to move A across the membrane. Without nutrients, energy is not available. You could have said that active transport requires energy, which is supplied by nutrients used to make ATP. Without nutrients, ATP will not be available. You could have said that energy from nutrients is stored in ATP, which is needed to move material A across the membrane. You could also say that without nutrients, the cell will not have the energy to carry out active transport, which is needed to move A across the cell membrane. So no nutrients equals no energy, no active transport. So over here, it says that the mitochondria are organelles present in most complex cells. The diagram below represents the mitochondrion in cells. Okay, so we see that the mitochondrion has its own DNA, right, and it's a part of this cell. Explain why the mitochondria are essential to the survival of complex organisms. Well, what do mitochondria do? Well, they are considered the powerhouse of the cell. They make us energy. Specifically, they produce ATP. So mitochondria are essential to the survival of complex organisms because they provide them with ATP. They produce ATP, which is the molecule that we use for energy. So the mitochondria makes energy available for life forms. Without this energy, an organism will die. Or you could have said that the mitochondria converts energy stored in food into usable energy called ATP for organisms. You could also say that respiration or cellular respiration takes place in the mitochondria, and energy is made available for use by the organism, right? So this mitochondrion is very, very, very important because it produces energy that we need to undergo almost every single life process out there. So 69 is based on this blurb right here. It says that unlike most other organelles, mitochondria contain their own DNA. This DNA is in the form of a double-stranded ring molecule that can replicate. The number of mitochondria in a cell can increase when the number of mitochondria reproduce. That makes sense, right? If you're reproducing, you're making more copies of yourself. Mitochondrial DNA mutates. Some of these mutations have been linked to certain diseases in humans. Mitochondrial DNA is passed on to children through their mothers, and this chart to the left illustrates this process, right? So if the father has a disease with his mitochondria, his children don't have a disease. Why? Because the mitochondria is produced, or the genes inside of your mitochondria, you get them from your mom, right? It's inherited through your mom. So in this case, this is a very special type of inheritance. Instead of inheriting half of the blueprint from your mom, half from your dad, you actually inherit some more sections of this blueprint or this DNA from your mom than your dad. So in this case, it's not a 50-50 split. Maybe this part is your mom, this part is your dad. This outcrop here is the gene for, or the genetic information found in your mitochondria. And this is true here because look, in her blueprint, she has this mitochondrial issue, and her kids take that section of it. So all of them are going to have this issue as well. So provide evidence from the mitochondrial inheritance that supports that mitochondria are usually inherited from the mother. So you could say that the chart shows that the children are only affected when the mother has the mutated DNA. Pretty simple. The chart shows that when the father has the disease, it's not passed on to his children. Thus, it must be passed on to the children by the mother, right? Because the father doesn't impact the inheritance. So number 70 says that different cells in the human body contain different numbers of mitochondria. The chart to the left shows the approximate number of mitochondria present in various cells. Number 70 asks us to state which cell type would probably be most affected by mitochondrial diseases. So in this case, we see that there's a number of mitochondria in various cells. So the more mitochondria that a certain cell has, probably the more energy it needs, right? So we can see here that the amount of mitochondria in liver cells is the greatest, right? This has the most amount of mitochondria anywhere else. So if we have a mitochondrial disease, liver cells will be the most impacted because they have the most to lose. They have the most amount of mitochondria that they're relying on. So we can say that liver cells may be most affected since they contain most mitochondria. So if you wrote that down, you would have gotten full credit. You could have also said that liver cells could be most affected since they contain more mitochondria than other cells listed. So as long as you say that the liver cells contain the most amount of mitochondria, and that's your reason as to why they would be the most impacted, that would be the correct answer here. So in this case, 71 and 72 relate to this text right here. It asks, why is the sky blue? One method researchers are investigating to decrease the impact of climate change is stratospheric aerosol scattering. This involves the usage of airplanes or balloons to spray tiny particles of sulfate aerosols, which are kind of like gases, or calcium carbonate into the upper atmosphere. The particles reflect the sunlight back into space. Climate modeling has shown that the use of this technology could lead to a decrease in extreme temperatures and intensity of tropical storms. It could also reduce ice loss and sea level rise as well. However, there are risks associated with this technology. While this model shows how global benefits, local benefits might vary considerably. Also, since this technology does not address carbon emissions, as it continues to get warmer, there will be a need to spray more and more particles into the atmosphere. That could change the appearance of the sky from blue to white. There are also concerns that introducing sulfate aerosols in the upper atmosphere could damage the ozone layer. So essentially, the Earth is getting too hot, right? The sun is penetrating the atmosphere and it's heating up the globe. So what we can do is if we spray this atmosphere with particles, right? These white particles will then reflect the solar beams off of it. So instead of the sun and the beams reaching the surface, the beams are then being reflected out, and being reflected out. As a result, there's less heat going to the ground. The only issue here is that this may damage the environment because this fine mist or this spray of particles could actually go ahead and damage the ozone layer, which will just lead to more and more UV rays reaching the sun, reaching the surface of our planet. Also, this doesn't really address global warming because this doesn't mean that all of a sudden we'll stop burning fossil fuels. So this means that even though we're reflecting more sunlight, we're still releasing more and more gas that traps heat, so we'll have to release more and more of these particles, which could damage the environment even further. So one reason for supporting the use of this technology is that it could prevent global warming, right? The loss of ice or the sea level could be reduced, right? The amount of ice that melts each year can be reduced, and the rise in the sea level can also be reduced by this technology. That's one good thing. You could also say that the severity of storms could be reduced. You could also say that climate change could be slowed, and you could have said that it could have a positive effect on climate change. Any of these values, literally anything that they stated in these two paragraphs, would have given you full points, right? 72, explain why it would be important to continue efforts to reduce carbon emissions even if this technology were to be used, right? So we just talked about this, right? Without reducing carbon emissions, the planet will continue to warm up regardless. If you don't cut carbon emissions, there's more greenhouse gases that are going to be produced, even though the sunlight is mainly reflected, right? The Earth still emits heat of its own that needs to escape. These greenhouse gases released by burning of fossil fuels sprays or forms an even bigger layer in addition to this silver layer right here that just reflects the heat back down to the Earth, right? So it's still going to keep rising. The temperature is still going to keep rising. You could also say that more carbon emissions will continue to warm the planet and more particles will need to be sprayed into the upper atmosphere. You could say that this technology only tries to cool the planet but does not address how to prevent it from warming up in the first place, right? This is just a temporary fix. This isn't actually addressing the fact that, hey, why are we so hot? Well, we're so hot because we have been burning fossil fuels for so long and disrupting the environment. Oh, cool, you can cool down the planet. That won't stop us from continuing to use these fossil fuels, right? We could have also said that this technology only tries to cool the planet but doesn't address how to prevent it from warming up in the first place. You could say that this technology doesn't address increased CO2 in oceans, which leads to ocean acidification. Again, right, as you burn more and more fossil fuels, right, you're releasing more and more CO2 in the atmosphere, which acidifies oceans. You could also said that continually adding chemicals into atmosphere could damage the ozone layer. So this is not a permanent solution because the more particles you add, the more damage the ozone layer gets and the hotter it gets regardless for us, right? So that's all 16 questions from this section gone over, right? I decided not to write it in because I feel like that would have taken way too long for all of us watching this video. I hope that this helped you. If you want to keep watching this video or keep reviewing this test, part D is already uploaded. It's in the description of this video. If you want to go back to the previous part, B2, it's already uploaded in the description of this video as well. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know and leave them in the comments. Hope you guys learned something and I hope you have a nice day.